Hey, Damon Card here again from Life Mastery Gym. We experience reality in two dimensions, and one of those dimensions is time. How can you use time, your subjective experience of time, to transform at the identity level? Well, that's what this demonstration that you're about to see is all about. By the end of this demonstration, you're going to have a much better understanding of how time shapes your experiences. And if time is shaping your experiences, it's shaping who you believe yourself to be. And who you believe yourself to be determines how successful you become and whether or not you live a rewarding, fulfilling, and satisfying life. After doing a lot of this work on myself and doing this work with hundreds of clients, I'm basically opening up the doors so that you can take a peek into how I coach people in this aspect of identity, the time aspect of identity, because when you change time, it will change your sense of reality, and we can use that to create a better reality for ourselves. If you're a little impatient and you want to jump right to it and you want to start learning this stuff, go to the link down below in the description, click that link, and it'll start you off with an assessment, but it'll also show you some other paths, some other avenues that you can gain access to these materials and start learning this right away. This is one of my students, Josh. He's also a Leonardo DiCaprio impersonator. Of course, I'm kidding about that. Or maybe he was. He didn't tell me though. Okay, so what is people might be asking? Okay, what is the purpose of what we're going to do here? Why are we playing with time, and why is time so important? And the answer to that question is, well, we really experience reality in two dimensions. That is space and that is time. And if you remove one of these, then you don't have a sense of reality. If you think about any experience you've ever had, any memory you've ever had, any fantasy you've ever had, or any projection into the future that you've ever had, there's two common elements, and that would be space and time. So time is subjective in the sense of how we perceive it. And yes, there is clock time, that sort of measurement of objective time. That's not what we're dealing with here. But even that measurement of objective time gets passed through our sense of time, our filters of time. So when you understand how to when you understand the mechanisms within yourself about how you're creating your sense of time, then once again you can change it, and in changing it, this has a incredible effect on your sense of reality. So we also want to be careful with it too. We're always looking for the changes that we make. They're making our sense of self or the quality that we're working with stronger, more grounded, not necessarily feel better? Because, and right before this, we started this call, we were having a discussion about values, Josh and I, and he mentioned pride. And I always say, and I got caught on this with my mentor, Steve. One time I mentioned, I asked him what he was most proud of. And I got one of those, like the master, like smacking the student on the head kind of thing. And he's like, I don't do pride. And I was like, what do you mean? And then he got into talking about what the components are that bring pride together, and how that shapes our sense of reality, and how that affects how we process our reality. And when you understand all that, it's like, well, yeah, it's definitely something to stay away from. But it's more something to understand. And so we're going to jump into understanding time and how it affects us, and doing so in a way that makes this quality that we're going to work with here more grounded for Josh. That sort of pride kind of thing that starts to move in the direction of ungrounding us. It feels good, but things that feel good aren't necessarily good for us. The drinking alcohol feels good, taking drugs feels good, but there's always that crash. And so we always want to stay very grounded. So we want to be grounded in time. All right, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And at any point, if you have any questions about what we're doing, feel free to ask. Feel free to stop me. And I want to make sure that you understand what we're doing.
Sure.
And everybody else who's watching. Okay, so before this, we talked about working with a quality that you're very certain of, that you like about yourself, that you feel pretty grounded in. And so we're going to refer to that as Q. And the reason we do that, if you've seen the previous demonstration that I did, we want to work without content. And the reason we want to do that is because it makes us more efficient. We work faster. Sometimes when I'm coaching people, I will use content. Sometimes the person has to sort of talk it out, and then so content becomes a factor, but especially early on when you're learning this, it's so powerful to work without content because it makes you really good at this for one thing, and it also keeps you from getting stumped as much. So we're going to stay out of content as much as possible, so much so that I won't even know what quality we're actually working with here. We'll just refer to it as Q. And I also want to make sure that Josh is very Q, so I'll ask him, are you Q?
Yes.
Okay. So again, what I'm looking for is a good, solid, congruent answer. His nonverbal cues were aligned to his verbal message, the affirmative. Sometimes you'll see people go, yes. And I'm like, no, that's not, that quality is not certain. It can be ambiguous or it might not even exist at all. Sometimes we'll say yes because we want it to be true, but the body, the nonverbals tell you what you need to know. And in this case, I believe Josh, what his word said matched with what his body told me. All right. So in being Q, I'm assuming, and this would be more of the previous demonstration that I did, that you have examples of being Q.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when you think about those examples and you think about time, past, present, and future, where do these examples exist?
I chose this cue specifically because I was certain of it, but I noticed that all my examples are fairly recent past. So I kind of wanted to explore. I've tried this with other cues, and they were more spread out.
Okay.
It's like I would say within the last year.
Okay.
I had,
So your sense of this is that you've had this quality just more recently.
I guess, yeah, or I maybe I'm aware of it, or I acknowledge that I have it now. I don't know.
Okay. So it's interesting too, because you're using the word now. And so we have the past, we have the present. So you're saying there's examples in the recent past.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also using the word now. So would you say that you feel Q right now and that because you have examples right now?
That's a good question. I think my present seems to be fairly long. So like the last 6 months even feels like this is a chunk of my life that I consider now. So when I have examples in the past 6 months, it feels like then, yeah, I'm that now.
I'm really happy you're saying that because it's almost like it's almost like you knew where I was going with this. That your sense of the present, and most people's sense of the present, it varies widely. So you will have people whose sense of the present is this very moment and nothing outside of it. You have some people's sense of the present moment or the present as being 2 weeks into the past and 2 weeks into the future. I think maybe you're the first person I've come across who has such a wide sense of the present. 6 months is quite some time. But again, that's not for me to say that's good or bad. It's just how you do it. And that's perfectly okay.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something we want to bring our attention to. The sense of everyone has a different sense of the present. And so we want to tune into that as well. So your sense of the present is about 6 months into the past. Does it go into the future at all?
No.
Okay, so some people's will. You'll find that some people their present actually goes into the next few weeks or the next few days of what they're going to do. Okay, good. So let's you kind of indicated this already, but let's explore it a little bit further. When you look back over your life, like if you had a timeline in front of you, and you look back to all the way back to when you were a baby, then to early childhood, teenage years. Were you Q?
I think so.
Okay. So when you say you think so, that doesn't sound very certain. So would you
Yeah.
say that there were periods that you were Q and periods that you weren't Q?
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay. And so do the periods that you weren't Q, do they all seem to have a set amount of time, or is it completely random? Like some were a month, some were a few months, some were years?
Let me think. I think it was more like there was maybe a few years where I wasn't.
Okay.
And
So
then mostly was.
Okay. So there's definitely some gaps there. And so what I'm looking for by asking Josh this is this quality balanced and distributed throughout his entire life evenly? And it sounds like it's not. And even still, this is a quality that he's very certain about. So even with some of these gaps there, he still feels certain about this quality. So when we'll come back to this a little bit later, and we'll see if we can fill those gaps in and see what happens when we do fill those gaps in. All right, so chunk size of time. Now, when you think of your examples of being Q, and it sounds like most of those examples are in the recent past and even the present,
Mhm.
when you think about them, what is the time frame that they're represented in? So I'll give you an example. If I'm working with persistence, which is one of my qualities I like to model for myself because I feel like I'm very persistent, and I ran a marathon, which I
Mhm.
wouldn't do because I don't like running, but let's let's say I did. um, I ran a marathon, and to me, that's an example of me being persistent. But when I think about it, when I reference that example of me being persistent by running that marathon, I only see the moment I crossed the finish line. Like it's only a moment that's represented. So I know that I ran the marathon and it took, all day to do it. But when I think about it, it's only represented by a moment. And so you want to look at your examples of being Q and look at what is the moment, or what is the time frame that's represented. Is it a moment? Is it an hour? Is it 3 hours? Is it a week? And you don't have to sit there and like, oh, if my example is represented by a week, I have to sit here for a week and go through it. No, we can scroll through this quickly. But we want to know, how is it being represented? What is the time frame that's being represented?
Um, I would say 5 to 10 minute chunks
Okay.
represent.
And so that seems to be common to most of your examples, if not all of them.
Yeah, except for when I was trying to think of examples in the distant past, um, like in childhood, it was more like, oh yeah, then it was like a year, or it was like a general quality.
I see.
Sometimes it's hard to not just tell you what
Yeah, let's leave
do
it
it.
alone.
Yeah.
Uh, oh, you have an interesting sense of time. This is good. I don't normally people they go by moments and then everything's a moment. Everything's represented as a moment, even, but you have a different sense of time as it goes into the distant past, or a different time frame.
That's how it feels. Yeah. If I'm like, okay, was I Q in childhood? Then it's like generally, yeah, I could think, but I'm not thinking of a specific memory. It's more like, I don't know.
So go ahead and think of a specific memory in childhood that represented Q, and just notice what time frame it is.
Yeah, I think it'd be in the like 1 to 5 minute.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm also getting here is that even though this is a solid quality for you, there's a lot of tuning up that we can do here, which is great because then we'll see how that affects you when we do start doing some changes here. All right. So one more thing I want to check in is, now the elements of these aspects of time are very, very closely related. So the devil is in the details here, the finer distinctions. Some of them will start to seem like they're kind of alike, but I want to bring attention to these finer distinctions. So the next one we're going to cover is called spreading. And what spreading is this is just basically a way to refer to what is the overall evaluation we make of something in time based on certain things that happen. So I know that sounds very vague, but let's take we have a day, 24 hours, and maybe one or two bad things happen during that day, and not like terrible, but just like, I don't know, you stub your toe, you find out you owe more in taxes than you thought, those two things. And we have a tendency to take things like that and spread them throughout the day and say, I had a bad day.
Mhm.
Now, and most of us do have a tendency toward the negative that way, but there are these eternal optimists who will do the exact opposite. Like some one or two, good things happen, and then it becomes a good day, or it even becomes a good week off of those one or two things. Now, clearly, if we really sat and looked at that day and we really examined all the things that happened, well, lots of things happened that could be categorized as good or bad. It's our choice of how we decide to spread that. So another example would be a marriage lasts for 10 years and we say it was a bad marriage. It was, and what we're only really referencing is the final year. There could have been 9 years of bliss. It could have been 9 years of a great marriage, and then the last year was just really bad. So then that 1 year gets spread across the entire 10 years, which is kind of not fair, but that's what we do. So when you look over your timeline in your past, do you see elements of having spread that? Because this happened, you suddenly spread it and say, oh, well, that means that this whole time period, what I was Q, or this was Q.
Yeah, I think I was doing that. That's what I was doing in the distant past. And then when the things were further back, I was spreading that moment and be like, okay, as a kid, I must have been Q because I had that one.
Okay. And then
So,
can you see the opposite as well? Oh, I'm not Q during this period because these few things happened.
yeah, I could see that. Kind of shrinks. It sort of feels like it shrunk the examples of Q during that time to almost zero.
Interesting. Okay.
I can see that.
Good. All right. Let's go back to past, present, and future. And you said that it sounds like we have examples of Q, or you have examples of Q, both in the past and the present. Would you say that's good? That's
Yeah.
correct? Okay. Do you have any in the future?
No, I'm every time any of these Q things I've been working on talk about the future, it's like it almost doesn't register with my brain or something.
Okay. Now, most people don't have future examples of their qualities. And I was kind of surprised when that was even introduced. It was like, well, how can I have future examples? The future hasn't happened yet. But then I would meet plenty of people who did have future examples, meaning they thought into the future having this quality of whatever it was, especially in areas of their life where they really wanted to be this quality. And for those of you who are NLPers and or who do hypnosis, you know what future pacing is. And so this is much more powerful than a future pace. I don't want to say, well, I shouldn't say it that way, because it actually is a future pace when we do this. So think about what it would be like to be Q in the future and choose a context, because that usually makes it easier. And here's the
Mhm.
thing about this: you can be as creative as you want to be. You don't want to be very detailed, because if you put a lot of details into it, we don't really know what the future is going to hold. So if you put too many details on it, you might not actually this might actually not future pace or generalize into the future, because when you arrive in that future time or that place and it doesn't look like what you expect it to, and it doesn't have those details, then you're not going to connect with that as Q. So we want vague details. So like if you see yourself with other people, you don't really know who these people are. You can see that you're with people, but you don't see their faces, because you don't know who this is going to happen with, unless maybe it's you're working on a business with a business partner, and so you know this is going to be your business partner into the future. So there's a good chance you're going to be doing this with that business partner. That makes sense. If you're doing this and you want Q in your marriage or with your partner, and you're already with that person, that makes sense to see that person. But everyone else, you don't want any specific details about who's going to be in the future. You don't want specifics on exactly what you're going to do, for all the reasons that I've mentioned. There's another element that you want to be sure to do as well. You want to be disassociated. And the reason you want to be disassociated is you're not there yet. You're not in the future yet. And what happens if somebody associates into something they want in the future, the motivation to go after it goes way down. So we want to put you out there being Q, and because you like this about yourself, it's very motivating. So you feel a natural want to step into the image or to the situation. If you're not very visual, you might want to step into it, and you can hear and you can feel, but you want it to be compelling. You want it to feel like, wow, I want to be there, but then hold back because you're not there. But that motivation you'll feel that pull, and even when you're not conscious of it, you will still feel that pull to move in that direction. So your unconscious will be working on this for you.
Okay. So just to make a quick distinction, you're saying I want to do the same process that I would, for an example, in the past, like see it the same way. I'm not putting myself into the future past that and looking back at it as a memory.
No,
Does that make sense?
I know that's not what we call time distortion. And no, I don't want you to do that. There's that can be a useful process. And maybe, later if you want to step in, some people say, well, Damon, I've done, I've been taught NLP where you should step into the future. It's fine if you want to step into it and just get a sense of what's there, what it's like, maybe what I need, but you always want to come back to now. And yeah, what some people do is they'll step into the future and then look back on now as if now has already happened. And we call that time distortion. For the sake of what we're doing here, that's not going to be very useful.
Okay.
So all we want to do is, and this is basically what creating a vision is really about. You're creating a vision into the future of you being Q in the ways that you want to be Q and in the context in which you want to be Q. And the cool thing is that it shouldn't take long because you're not going to put a lot of detail into it. And you want to be creative about it. Like make it interesting. It doesn't have to look, all the submodalities don't have to look like the past. You can recode this differently. You want to know that this is the future that you're looking at.
Okay.
So go ahead and just quickly make some future examples of being Q, and in the context in which you want to be Q.
Okay. I think I've got a couple.
Okay, do a little more than a couple.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the reasons why I wanted you to do more is because I didn't really see a shift in you when you just did a couple. And then as you were doing more, and for those who are watching, again, turn your calibration skills on. His breathing shifted. You saw some micro movement in his face. That tells me that something's happening. I don't know exactly what's happening. I think I know what's happening. But I wanted to see some sort of nonverbal response. So about how many examples do you have?
Five. Five-ish. Yeah.
And when you notice those, how do you feel about Q when you notice these future examples?
I feel good. It feels like I like this cue about myself. So it's like, good. I don't have to worry about that not being there.
Yeah, good. And I think a lot of people suffer from that. They're like, okay, well, yeah, I'm feeling it now, but I don't know if this is going to last. I don't know if I'm going to be this into the future. And by creating future examples, it kind of relaxes that, and you don't need to be investing nervous energy and stress into whether or not I'm going to be this into the future. If you have future examples, which also serve the purpose of sort of guiding you to being Q into the future.
Mhm.
Now, all you created was 5 examples. If I were spending more time working with you, I'd have you create 20. Like I would want you to have a lot. And the more variation of context you have, different situations, the more powerful this would be. So your homework is after this, create a lot more future examples.
Okay.
And make sure you're disassociated, and make sure the details are vague. Make sure you do that. Okay. All right. So balanced distribution in time. Let's go look over your timeline again and find those gaps. And find a gap. Find a somewhat recent gap. Probably the most recent gap in your timeline of not having Q.
Okay.
And how long of a period was this?
I'd say 2 years, but already as I'm thinking of it, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, what about when you did that during that time?
Yeah. So what's happening for him is we're already started shifting his unconscious to sorting for Q across time. So this is not unusual for it to start to happen automatically. Sometimes it doesn't, but I would say sometimes it does. More often it won't until you start really bringing attention to it. So what's happening is we're bringing his attention more and more toward these experiences of Q. So naturally his gaps are starting to fill in. But so for the sake of the demonstration, I want to show people what I would do to help you do this. So 2 years is quite a long time. for a gap. I think normally they tend to be like 3 months, 6 months when I work with people, but I have come across someone who had like a 10-year gap, which made me wonder how they were even certain about it to begin with, certain about having this quality. But anyway, let's let's think about right before those 2 years started. So right before those 2 years started, then you would have been Q, right?
Hmm.
Okay, and then if we jump to right when the 2 years ended, you were once again Q.
Right.
Okay, so let's work off of a presupposition here, and that is that if you were Q right before and you were Q right after, Q didn't disappear during those 2 years. You had to have Q. It's not like it just appears and disappears and reappears. Who you are is who you are, and these qualities they're not tangible. They're not skills. So it's not like, I learned how to play the violin and then I stopped playing, and so I lost my skill. These are qualities. They don't go away. So knowing that, we can presuppose that you had Q this whole time, but what might have happened was you got distracted from it. You were putting your attention on something else where it gave you the feeling that you weren't experiencing Q. But when you go back and look, surely you were having experiences of Q, even if your attention wasn't on it.
Yeah, totally. Now that I started thinking about it, was like there were a lot of ways in which I was Q. It wasn't like a gap. It was more like I had a judgment about that period of time,
Mhm.
kind of unrelated. Like I wasn't super happy with. I was in just it's not going to give away Q, but I was in a job where I was like, it's not really my passion, my thing. But there are a lot of examples of me being Q, even in that job. But I think I painted that whole phase as like I didn't, I wasn't living true to myself.
So what happens now that you realize that, and that you can fill in these gaps with all these experiences of being Q during this period, bringing your attention to it now? How do you feel about Q when you do that? How do you feel about that? Does it feel stronger, weaker, or no difference?
Much stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if I think of a time that was I thought was a blackout of Q, and it's almost like by calling attention to it, I'm thinking of more examples during that time period than even the recent past where I'd started. So
Yeah. And so that affects your sense of it, makes it feel stronger, wouldn't it? More,
yeah.
yeah, because there's more of a cohesiveness in time of having Q. So let's jump to the earliest gap, the very earliest one that you can remember.
Okay.
And how long is this? How wide is this gap? Or what period of time does it stretch over?
Um, I'm thinking about again a couple years.
A couple of years? Okay.
You know,
And just so I can have some reference about how old were you during this period?
like middle school age.
Okay.
But I also have a hard time like that period of time in my life feels like I don't know what it almost feels like a black hole of memories. There's I don't know,
Okay.
sure stuff there, but
All right. Well, I think there's probably a lot more treasure to mine in that time period than just this Q that we're working with. Anytime there's a black hole like that, again, you said something very interesting about the other gap. It usually has to do with a judgment you've made about that time period, and so all you have to do is just let go of that judgment and say, okay, well, what if it wasn't that? What if it really wasn't how I judged it to be? And when you made that choice was usually around that time. It was a much younger you making probably a pretty harsh judgment, and now that you're older and wiser, you probably wouldn't make that judgment anymore.
hmm,
The reason that judgment is still in place is because you just haven't gone back and revisited it and questioned it. It's still just like, okay, you made that assumption and then life went on. But now we can go back to that time and then we can say again, so you were Q right up until this gap,
mhm.
you were Q right after. Q didn't disappear. So you were Q during this entire time. And once again, your attention just wasn't on Q. But now that you're bringing it back to Q, were there times when you were Q during this time?
Yeah. And it's also like I'm getting a flood of memories from that time, which I had kind of considered as, I don't remember anything from those years. But now that I'm kind of thinking about it, I'm getting quite a bit.
Yeah, and I can see your skin tone is changing in your face. There's more flush, more red coming in. That's another sign that he's going through a shift, which is good. It doesn't seem like it's bothering you. It seems like it's a good thing. So we'll keep
Yeah.
going with it. So let me ask you. There's some. This we're gonna go. We're gonna do a little bit more here. So you made a judgment about this time period from before, and now you're accessing these memories again. What new idea would you like to have about this time period? And it doesn't have to be a judgment. It just means you want to replace the judgment with something more positive, more open, because judgments are kind of harsh and they're limiting. So how would you like to think about this time period now instead of having that judgment?
Uh, I'd like to think I was finding my boundaries in
Yeah.
terms of, yeah, that's, you know, a kid figuring out where they're at.
How do you feel?
And
How do you feel about that right now?
yeah, it feels good. It's like, it feels like a forgiveness for, I kind of broke that period of time out because I didn't like some of the stuff I did at that time. So I was like, that's not me. So I'm going to remove that from my memory bank kind of.
Yeah.
Now it feels more like, oh no, there was still a lot of me, a lot of good me in there too. Just I
Yeah.
was finding my boundaries of where I was comfortable with, I guess.
So what he's talking about too is he's sort of isolated a part of himself, and when you do that you cut yourself off from all of the wisdom and the resources of that time period. And just because it wasn't maybe it didn't feel good, maybe there were things that were going on that just didn't feel good, and so when that happens we have a tendency to block those things off. But when we do that we lose a very important part of ourselves. We lose a lot of resources, we lose a lot of wisdom. So to reconnect with that right now, to allow in all that wisdom of all the things that you learned during that time, to allow in all those resources, everything that was there. It was a much richer time than you were able to appreciate at the moment, but now you can. And now you can get it all back. It doesn't have to be disconnected from you anymore. And all it comes down to is now, so all this was kind of in your unconscious, but now you can make a conscious choice to welcome that part back, welcome that time period back, welcome those resources back, welcome all that wisdom that you cultivated during that time, and now you can have a new understanding about it.
Yeah, I like that. It feels good. It kind of feels like, oh, I found all these videos on my hard drive that I hadn't looked at for a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
So we can keep doing this and we can keep going through every gap, but I think you kind of got the gist of it, and you could probably do this on your own now. One of the things that a gap that I normally run into when I'm working with people is whatever quality they're working with, they don't have a sense of having it early in childhood, because they're like, well, how could I have been Q in early childhood? And I'll give an example. Say we're modeling the quality of intelligence. The person believes they're an intelligent person, and then when we start going into balanced distribution in time, they say, oh, well, yeah, there's, from 0 to 4, I don't have a sense of having Q, or I don't have a sense of being intelligent. And so there's the gap. Now, this really has to do with how that person judges what intelligence is. And so sometimes we have to take our definition and widen the scope of what we include in that definition. So the truth is that you're born an intelligent being. You're born with intelligence. A baby learns a language without ever being instructed to, without ever sitting in a classroom, without ever reading a book. A baby will pick up a language. Like, if that's not intelligence, what is? So you will, by going into your early past, if you run into this gap because you think, oh, well, I couldn't have been Q as a baby, or, as a very young child, then widen the scope of your definition of Q. And that's kind of what we're doing. We're doing this in a little bit different way. We're taking a time period for you, and we're widening that scope to say, you know, this wasn't a bad time, though you might have experienced it that way. This was actually a time really rich in resources and understanding, because you were sorting out who you were. You were sorting out who you were and who you were not, and creating boundaries, which we need boundaries. So basically we're changing the way that we think about ourselves in time. And this, I can't even stress enough how important this is and how healing it can be, because this is where we also find all of our wounds. And if we can find those wounds and stop judging ourselves based on these wounds, or stop judging the world or other people based on our wounds, your reality will change absolutely, moving forward in your life. And I could go on and talk a lot more about this, but we need to move on to some of these other things here. So let's go to chunk size of time. So we talked about your time frame on your memories about cue being between 5 and 10 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead and grab one of these experiences and kind of pop it out of wherever it is and bring it a little bit closer to you so you can work with just this one, and you're not going to be distracted by the other examples.
Okay.
And so this is about 5 to 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Maybe a little longer.
okay, good. So what happens when you narrow that time frame down to one moment? How do you feel?
It's like the story's incomplete.
Okay.
So
And how does it affect your sense of cue?
it feels like you need more context to understand why that was cue.
So it feels
You know,
stronger, weaker, or no difference?
weaker.
Okay. So let's open it up to an hour.
Yeah, I like that. I like that better, actually.
So for those of you watching, you might want to roll this back. You saw that deep breath he took. That's a clear indication a shift happened. So he likes the wider time frame. So one of the reasons why that happens is because you're allowing more information, more context into this. And so typically more information you have about something, the more certain you feel about it. So it feels stronger. So there is a threshold here, and we're going to find it. Let's open it up to 2 hours and see what happens.
It feels diluted.
Okay, perfect. So what we found here is, so an experience is marked out by a beginning and an end. It always is. That's what an experience is. An experience implies that there's a beginning to it and there's an end to it. But in life, we don't we've never known a beginning or an end. We don't remember being born, and obviously if you can hear me, you're not dead. So we haven't had a beginning and an end. We haven't experienced a beginning and an end to life itself, but we have had experiences which we mark out. Ones, this is where it started and this is where it ended. Sometimes that's absolutely arbitrary, and sometimes it's a very specific reason why that is. And so we can play with this time frame and find out where it serves us best. But if when we take an experience and we expand the time frame far enough, it will get to the point where it ceases to be that experience. It just kind of bleeds off into everything else. And so we still want to maintain the experience, but we want to find where that sweet spot is, that optimization. So play around with between an hour and 2 hours and find where exactly is it optimal to have this time frame set that makes your quality feel stronger, more grounded, more resilient.
Yeah, I think I would stick it to the hour, or even like a 45 minutes.
Okay, whatever works best for you.
Yeah.
In addition to this, and again, this is going to be your homework, because we're not going to sit through this and do this for everyone. If you do this with several of these and you find like that sweet spot, what'll happen is you don't have to do it for all of them, because I'm sure you have like hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of cue. So you don't need to sit and do it with all of them. When you show your unconscious a better way to do something, it will naturally do it unless there's any sort of resistance to it. So
Mm.
do this for between 5 and 10 of these examples later, after this call. And because your unconscious is always looking for efficiency and always looking for what's better, you'll probably wake up the next morning and they will all be transformed into an hour-long time frame. And because that's how generative our minds are. And it's quite amazing when that happens. I have clients do that all the time. They'll email me the next day and they were like, hey, you remember we're working on these examples? Like, they're all changing and there's more there. And it's like, okay, yeah, your mind will just do that. When you show it a better way, it will naturally do it. So you don't have to sit and, for like 100, 100 examples do that with. Okay, so the last but not least, we're going to go to spreading, and there's a shortcut with spreading. So well, before I get to the shortcut, with spreading, what we could do is you could go over your timeline and just look at, okay, now that I've filled in these gaps, now that I realize there's a lot more examples of being Q than I realized throughout time, maybe these gaps, these dark spots, now that I've brought that all in general, you can generalize your life, your past, as being Q, which makes Q much stronger for you. And then of course you can build out the future as well, so that you get your Q into the future. With spreading, it's kind of what you're doing. You're acknowledging those examples, and then you're making a determination based on those examples that my entire life I was Q.
Mm.
Now, I can go ahead and pose that question for you. And were you Q? Have you been Q your entire life?
I'd say, yeah.
Okay, but there was a little bit of hesitation there. And the reason for that is because there's still more we could do here, and more that we could do here, not just in time. We're only working in aspects of time. There's much more to this than just time. So that would be another session. So, but as far as spreading goes, a shortcut that we can use, and I can tell you're visual enough. I haven't been able to tell exactly how visual you are, but I can tell you are visual enough to make this work. So if Q had a color, what would it be?
That's tough.
Maybe I was wrong. Just as soon as I said you're visual enough to make this work, and
Yeah. I definitely feel visual, but I don't know that. I noticed in another exercise, like my examples were really desaturated, almost like the video it wasn't black and white, but it was just like the colors weren't vibrant. So I don't know if the color thing, my instinct said blue, but I don't know why.
okay, that actually it might be good, because when something comes up and we don't know why, logically we then go pick it apart, and that's usually not helpful to pick it apart or to question it too much. So let's think about this. I want you to envision being Q, a general vision of being Q into the future.
Okay.
And make it very general. It's symbolic. You see symbols of being Q. You see you being Q, but it's very vague. It's just sort of like this beautiful image that is very compelling. And when you do that, what color fits with that?
Yeah, I'd go blue with that.
Blue. Okay, so blue is probably a good bet. And if it doesn't work, we can always try a different color. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine your timeline out in front of you, and you can see on your timeline from the very beginning, birth, all the way across to the future.
Okay.
And where do you see that? Where does your timeline, where's the beginning of it? Show me with your hands. Where's the beginning of it, and where does it end?
Now, when you say timeline, are you saying like my examples?
Have you done any timeline work before?
No.
Okay. Did you brush your teeth this morning?
Yes.
How do you know?
It was a distinct experience because I got a new electric toothbrush. So I was like, it's standing out in my.
Okay. So everybody who's listening, he's going into content. So we want to stay out of content.
Okay.
Point to so you see an image of you brushing your teeth?
I think that one's actually kind of more auditory.
Interesting. You're not quite as visual as I thought you were. Okay. Let me ask you this. Is there a sound, a voice, or music that Q would be if Q had a sound?
Would it count to be like a internal monologue?
It could.
Not really. Okay.
Are you able to understand the words? Or is it more about the sound of the voice?
Able to understand the words.
Yeah, so you're probably, what's happening is, so what is triggering, what sensory input is triggering the voice to say what the voice is saying? What are you seeing or hearing that the voice then goes, oh, blah, 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 blah?
I'm sorry, I'm lost.
Okay. So my assumption here, and I could be wrong, is that that voice is a response to something you're seeing or hearing. So, and we often have that, but it often comes at the end. So we have this whatever we're imagining, or it could be happening to us in real life, and then the voice kicks in and says, "Oh, that's
Mhm.
that." It's evaluating what's happening.
Okay. I can kind of, okay, so we're talking about Q now.
Go ahead. Yeah, I want you to keep doing whatever you were just doing. You were catching on to something.
Yeah, it seems like I can picture the visual trigger for when many times I think of me being Q.
Okay, good. In that image, is there a color that's represented that you associate with Q?
I don't know.
Okay, back to the other thing that we were working on. Did you brush your teeth yesterday?
Yes.
And how do you know you brushed your teeth yesterday?
I guess because I know I do it every day.
Okay. Did you see something or hear something that let you know that you brushed your teeth yesterday?
Yeah, I can see the bathroom.
Okay. And what about brush your teeth 2 weeks ago?
Yep. And I see a different bathroom where I was 2 weeks ago.
Okay. So what about, do you think you'll be brushing your teeth 1 year from now?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you know that?
My first instinct is to say I'm the kind of person who brushes his teeth. Um,
Is this
yeah, I guess
something?
I had a momentary flash of me doing that in the future, but
Yeah. And so I've been tracking your eyes, and when you were referring to the past experiences, you first looked left, and then you would look over here. And then when I asked you about the future experiences, you first looked here, and then your eyes went here. So
uh,
what you were giving me makes a lot of sense at first, and then there was a shift. Okay, so if you're looking here for the past, that means your timeline stretches out to your left, which is quite a normal way to for a timeline to stretch out. If you, when you're imagining the future, you would most people tend to look to the right, but that's can be different for everybody, and sometimes people's timelines go through them. But your eyes would shift back in the other direction. So I was wondering what that was about. That could be about a lot of things, and we could spend probably another hour just unpacking that. That could have been you trying to have a different understanding of it based on comparing it to the past or comparing it to the future. Again, I don't know exactly what was going on, but it was very interesting because you went from one extreme to the other. So
hmm.
let's get back on track here. Now, when you think of now, the present, where is that sense of that in comparison to your past and your future, your timeline? So we have a sense that your timeline is in the past is to your left,
Yeah,
future is to your right. Where's the present?
it definitely feels like midline,
Midline. Okay.
or
And,
yeah, I would say midline
and so you're doing this. Does it mean that it's in front of you, or do you feel like it's in you?
in front of me. So
Okay.
like if I drew a timeline of something else that wasn't my life, I would draw it like that, and the future would start here and go this way.
Perfect. Are you a very punctual person?
Not really.
No? Okay. The tendency is when people put their timelines out in front of them, they tend to be very punctual because they can see time very well. It's the
Hmm.
people whose timeline goes through them, they're not, because they're always so present and not really seeing the context of their timeline. But there's always exceptions to everything. So I was just checking. Now you can see your timeline because you can even tell by the way you were gesturing with your hands. You now have a sense of it being in front of you. When you look to your left and you look to the past, do you see where your timeline begins, where you were born?
Hmm.
Okay. So take that blue color, the blue color of Q, whatever Q is, and start there, bathing your timeline in that blue. It can be a brilliant light, or it can be like a very saturated, dense light, and then spread that blue light across your timeline, all through childhood, early teenage years, early adulthood, bring it to the present, and then keep spreading it into the future.
Kind of similar to when we thought about future examples. It's like, okay, there's more certainty.
So it feels more certain.
Mm-hmm.
And more certainty about Q makes you more confident about Q.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is something you value about yourself, it will also affect your self-esteem, the way you feel about yourself, because you believe you are this quality and it feels certain.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's pretty much it for this demonstration. So I'm now a little bit curious though, what was Q, or what is Q?
Resourcefulness.
Oh, good. That's a good one to work with. Yeah. So do you feel more resourceful, less resourceful, or the same from when we started?
More resourceful. I feel like it's less a matter of will or I won't I in a situation. It's more like I know I have that tool, whatever situation arises. Feels like.
And that doesn't feel good at all, does it?
Feels great.
Okay.
It made me want to, especially when we're doing that color thing, that was really cool. A lot of times when I'm doing these things, I want to make a physical representation of them. So like when I'm thinking of examples of equality, I want to make note cards of the way I see it. Or like with this, I'm like, okay, I'll make a big sheet of butcher paper and draw my colors. Like, I don't know if that's not good to do, or it doesn't feel like studying. It's more just like, that's how I kind of lock things in. It's like,
Well, there's an element of creation. And what I like to do is I like to write, especially when I have a transformation or I have something I've learned. It sounds to me like you're wanting to bring it into physical form. And that is a wonderful thing to do. That'll drive home your understanding and your learning and your clarity. But yeah, you kind of said what I was going to warn you against. You don't want to study this. This is not about studying. It's more about finding it in yourself. And then if you feel that urge to bring it into a medium, whether it's writing or something visual, that's a beautiful thing. I mean, that's where I think art comes from. And that sort of creativity generates these abstractions within us, and then we feel an urge to create. So it's a very beautiful thing. And I would say, go ahead and do that, and then check in. What does this work for you? Does it help you in doing that? But yeah, don't study it, because then that makes it an academic thing, and it's not really about who you are anymore. But if you feel the need to express this quality or these things that are actually abstract, timeline and things like that, if you feel a need to create something in physical form to help you with that, I think that would be a great practice.
cool.
All right, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this demonstration with me, and I hope everyone who's watching got a lot out of it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, what did you think? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you have any questions about anything I did during this process, make sure you put those down below too. I will respond to you. And as I mentioned before, if you want to learn how to do this, if you want to learn it just so that you can use it for yourself, or you want to learn it so that you can use it with coaching clients or therapy clients, go down to the description right here and click that link. And like I said, it'll give you access. You can start with yourself, start working on yourself by doing that assessment that you'll find there. And you'll also find that there's some other materials there that you can access so that you can start your journey in learning self-concept and learning all these aspects of your identity, the structures of your identity, so that you can have more control over them, you can change them, you can alter them, so that you can live the life that you want to live, that fulfilling, rewarding life that seems so elusive to so many people, but it doesn't have to be. Change and transformation does not have to be hard or difficult. When you know what's creating your sense of self, then you can change it, and it's not difficult. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button and hit the bell so that you'll be notified when new videos come out. And last but not least, if you can think of a friend or a family member, someone who you think would benefit from this video, make sure you share it with them. Take care.